A devastating JNIM assault on two military bases in northern Benin has sent shockwaves across West Africa and reignited a debate that many leaders had hoped to avoid. Despite years of international security cooperation, military training programs, intelligence partnerships, and foreign assistance, heavily armed militants were still able to launch a coordinated attack that inflicted significant damage and raised serious questions about the effectiveness of existing security strategies. For many observers, this was not simply another terrorist incident. It was a warning signal. It was a reminder that the security crisis that once seemed concentrated in the Sahel is steadily moving southward, threatening countries that previously believed they were protected by geography, diplomacy, or international partnerships. Today, we examine why this attack has become much more than a military event. We will explore how the rise of the Alliance of Sahel States, known as AES, has reshaped regional thinking about security, why the leadership of Captain Ibrahim Traore continues to attract attention across Africa, and whether Benin may eventually need closer cooperation with its northern neighbors to confront a growing threat. If you value in-depth African geopolitical analysis grounded in facts, history, and real developments on the ground, make sure you subscribe and join our growing community. The attack itself immediately captured regional attention because of its scale and organization. Reports indicated that hundreds of militants associated with JNIM participated in operations targeting military positions in northern Benin. The attackers reportedly conducted surveillance, coordinated their movements, and launched a highly organized assault that overwhelmed local defenses. The significance of the attack extends beyond the immediate casualties and material losses. For years, security analysts warned that extremist groups operating in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger would eventually seek to expand toward coastal West African nations. What many feared is now becoming reality. Benin has increasingly found itself on the front line of a conflict that was once viewed as a distant problem. The country's northern regions share strategic connections with areas that have experienced prolonged instability, making them vulnerable to infiltration and cross-border attacks. Perhaps the most important consequence of this incident is the conversation it has sparked. Across West Africa, policymakers, military officers, and ordinary citizens are asking difficult questions. If heavily supported security systems can still be breached, what adjustments are necessary? If terrorism continues to spread despite years of international involvement, should countries begin exploring alternative approaches? These questions have placed the experiences of Burkina Faso, Mali, and the broader AES alliance under renewed scrutiny. Whether one agrees with their policies or not, their efforts have become impossible to ignore, and the attack on Benin has only intensified that discussion. The expansion of terrorism across West Africa did not happen overnight. It is the result of years of shifting battlefields, evolving militant strategies, and changing regional dynamics. What is happening in Benin today mirrors a pattern that security experts have been warning about for a long time. For years, JNIM concentrated much of its activity in Mali, Burkina Faso, and parts of Niger. These areas became the center of the regional counterterrorism struggle. However, as military pressure increased in certain zones, extremist groups began looking for new opportunities beyond their traditional strongholds. This is one reason many analysts believe terrorism is gradually moving south. Militants understand that borders in West Africa are often difficult to secure. They exploit remote terrain, isolated communities, and gaps in regional coordination. As a result, countries that were once considered relatively insulated from the worst violence are now facing growing risks. Benin has become one of the clearest examples of this shift. Its northern territories sit near regions that have experienced years of instability. What once seemed like a distant security challenge has increasingly become a domestic concern. The recent attack demonstrated that the threat is no longer approaching. It has already arrived. The implications extend beyond Benin. Neighboring countries such as Togo and Ghana are also paying close attention to these developments. If extremist groups continue expanding toward coastal West Africa, the entire security landscape of the region could change dramatically. This reality has strengthened calls for deeper regional cooperation. Terrorist organizations do not respect national borders. They move where opportunities exist. Therefore, many observers argue that security responses must become just as flexible and coordinated. The attack on Benin serves as a powerful reminder that no country can afford to view itself in isolation. The future stability of West Africa may depend on how effectively nations work together against a threat that increasingly affects them all. The creation of the Alliance of Sahel States marked one of the most significant geopolitical developments in modern West African history. Formed by Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, the alliance emerged during a period when all three countries faced severe security threats and growing frustration with existing regional arrangements. At its core, the AES was designed around a simple idea. An attack against one member should be viewed as a challenge to all members. Rather than addressing terrorism as separate national problems, the alliance seeks to approach security as a shared regional responsibility. This philosophy represents an important departure from older models. For many years, security cooperation often depended heavily on external partnerships, international missions, and outside support. While those efforts achieved some successes, many communities across the Sahel continued to experience violence, displacement, and instability. The AES leadership argues that countries facing the same threat should coordinate more directly with one another. This includes improving intelligence sharing, increasing military communication, and strengthening the ability to respond rapidly to cross-border movements by armed groups. One of the most important aspects of the AES model is its emphasis on regional ownership. Leaders within the alliance frequently stress that security decisions should be guided primarily by local realities rather than distant priorities. Supporters believe this approach allows governments to react more quickly and design strategies that better reflect conditions on the ground. The recent attack in Benin has renewed interest in this model. As extremist groups continue to operate across national borders, many observers are asking whether stronger cooperation between countries facing similar threats could improve overall security outcomes. The AES does not claim to have solved every challenge confronting the Sahel. Terrorism remains a serious concern throughout the region. However, the alliance has introduced a framework that many Africans view as an attempt to build security capacity from within, rather than relying exclusively on external actors. That idea continues to attract attention as countries search for effective ways to protect their people and defend their sovereignty. To understand why Ibrahim Traore has become one of the most discussed leaders in Africa, it is necessary to look beyond military operations and focus on the broader philosophy that guides his leadership. For Traore, security is not simply about defeating armed groups. It is about rebuilding a nation in a way that reduces the conditions that allow instability to grow in the first place. Since coming to power, he has repeatedly emphasized that military victories alone cannot guarantee long-term peace. A country must also strengthen its economy, expand opportunities for its citizens, and reduce dependence on external actors. This perspective has become a central theme in Burkina Faso's national conversation and a major reason why his influence extends far beyond his country's borders. Supporters argue that Traore represents a new generation of African leadership focused on sovereignty, self-reliance, and national dignity. His speeches often connect security, economic development, and political independence as parts of the same challenge. According to this view, a nation that cannot feed itself, develop its industries, or control its resources will always face vulnerabilities regardless of how strong its military may become. This philosophy has resonated with many people across West Africa. In countries such as Benin, Togo, Ghana, and Senegal, growing numbers of citizens follow developments in Burkina Faso with interest. Some see Traoré as a symbol of African self-determination. Others remain cautious but acknowledge that his message has sparked important discussions about the future direction of the continent. The recent attack in Benin has added new relevance to these debates. As governments search for effective responses to expanding security threats, many observers are examining not only military strategies but also the broader ideas that shape them. In that context, Traoré's emphasis on linking security with development continues to attract attention. Whether one agrees with all of his policies or not, his impact on regional political discourse is undeniable and he has helped shift the conversation from dependence toward self-reliance and from reaction toward long-term national resilience. That influence may continue to grow as West Africa confronts increasingly complex security challenges. While the recent attack in Benin has drawn international attention, many observers have also focused on developments inside Burkina Faso and Mali. These two countries remain at the center of the regional struggle against extremist groups, and their experiences provide important context for understanding the broader security debate. In Burkina Faso, the government has pursued a strategy that combines military operations with efforts to strengthen national self-reliance. Security remains a major challenge, and no serious observer would claim that all problems have been solved. However, supporters of the current approach point to several developments that they believe demonstrate progress. Military authorities have expanded local defense initiatives, increased recruitment efforts, and sought to improve coordination between national forces and communities. At the same time, the government has promoted programs designed to increase domestic production, strengthen agriculture, and encourage greater economic independence. The underlying idea is that security and development must advance together. Mali presents a similar picture of determination mixed with ongoing challenges. The Malian armed forces, commonly known as FAMA, continue to play a central role in operations against JNIM and other armed groups. Military pressure has remained intense across multiple regions, particularly in areas that have long served as centers of insurgent activity. Supporters of the AES approach argue that sustained military pressure has made it more difficult for extremist groups to operate freely in some locations. Critics counter that significant threats remain and that stability has not yet been fully restored. Both observations can be true at the same time. What makes the experiences of Burkina Faso and Mali particularly relevant for Benin is not the claim of perfect success. Rather, it is the willingness of these countries to experiment with a model that links security cooperation, national sovereignty, and economic self-reliance. As Benin evaluates its own future strategy, the lessons emerging from its northern neighbors may become increasingly difficult to ignore. The rise of the alliance of Sahel states has not been welcomed by everyone across Europe, North America, and within certain international institutions. Concerns have been raised about the direction taken by Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Critics frequently point to issues involving governance, political transitions, press freedom, and human rights. Others argue that the withdrawal of AES members from ECOWAS risks creating new divisions within West Africa. These concerns are part of an important debate and should not be dismissed outright. Every government, regardless of its political system, should remain accountable to its citizens and strive to protect fundamental rights. However, supporters of the AES model present a different perspective. They argue that many of the security problems facing the Sahel developed during years when foreign military partnerships were already deeply involved in the region. From this viewpoint, it is reasonable for African nations to explore alternative strategies when previous approaches failed to deliver lasting stability. Supporters also emphasize that ordinary citizens often judge policies by practical outcomes rather than political theories alone. They ask whether communities are becoming safer, whether economic opportunities are improving, and whether governments are strengthening their ability to protect national sovereignty. The debate surrounding AES ultimately reflects a larger question facing Africa. Should security strategies continue to depend primarily on external frameworks? Or should African nations assume greater responsibility for designing solutions tailored to local realities? As events in Benin demonstrate, this discussion is no longer theoretical. It is increasingly tied to urgent questions of security, stability, and the future direction of the continent. The attack on Benin has created a moment of reflection not only for one country, but for the entire African continent. The central question is no longer whether the security threat is expanding. The evidence suggests that it is. The more important question is how nations choose to respond. Benin now stands at a strategic crossroads. It can continue relying primarily on existing security frameworks, strengthen bilateral partnerships, or deepen practical cooperation with neighboring countries that confront the same threats every day. Whatever path is chosen, the recent attack has demonstrated that security challenges can no longer be viewed through a purely national lens. The broader lesson for Africa is equally important. Long-term stability requires more than military strength alone. It requires regional cooperation, economic resilience, accountable leadership, and the ability to address the root causes of instability. These principles are increasingly shaping discussions across the continent. As Africa continues to evolve, the ideas of Pan-African cooperation, Burkina Faso, Africa New, Captain Ibrahim Traore, the African Union, Pan-Africanism, and Ibrahim Traore will remain at the center of important conversations shaping the continent's future. If you enjoyed this analysis, subscribe to the channel, share your thoughts in the comments, and stay with us for more in-depth coverage of the developments transforming Africa today. Have you ever wondered why a valley once used by extremist groups is now becoming one of the places they fear the most? Recently, Burkina Faso's BIR-23 launched a decisive operation against a JNIM position in Bangasso, a locality within the Sauru Valley. After several days of surveillance and intelligence gathering, the unit moved into action. When the operation ended, the militant base had been destroyed and valuable equipment had been seized. At first glance, this may appear to be another successful counterterrorism mission. However, the events in Bangasso may represent something much larger. They reflect changing military tactics in Burkina Faso, the growing influence of African-led security strategies, and a broader effort by the Alliance of Sahel states to strengthen regional self-reliance. If you are interested in understanding the forces reshaping West Africa today, be sure to follow the channel and stay with us until the end. To understand the importance of this operation, we must first look at the Sauru Valley itself. For years, the region has held strategic value because of its location and its role as a movement corridor for armed groups. Control of this area can influence security across surrounding communities. What makes the Bangasso operation stand out is not only the outcome, but also the preparation behind it. BIR-23 reportedly spent days monitoring the target, gathering information, and studying enemy activity before launching its assault. This detail reveals an important lesson. Modern military success is often built on patience, intelligence, and careful planning. In Bangasso, information became a weapon, and preparation laid the foundation for victory. The destruction of the Bangasso base was more than a tactical success. It represented a direct challenge to JNIM's ability to operate freely inside the Suru Valley. According to reports from the operation, BIR-23 not only eliminated the position, but also recovered weapons, satellite communication equipment, and mobility assets used by the militants. Each of these items plays an important role in sustaining insurgent activity. Weapons provide combat capability. Communication devices allow coordination across remote areas. Vehicles make it possible to move fighters, supplies, and information quickly across difficult terrain. When a group loses these resources, the impact goes far beyond a single battlefield encounter. Replacing trained fighters may be difficult, but rebuilding a disrupted support network can be even harder. Logistics, communications, and mobility are the foundations that allow insurgent organizations to survive over long periods. This is why the Bangasso operation carries strategic significance. The loss of a base means the loss of a safe location for planning, regrouping, and storing resources. It forces militants to spend time and energy rebuilding instead of expanding their activities. The psychological effect is equally important. Areas once viewed as secure can suddenly become vulnerable when intelligence-driven operations begin targeting hidden positions. For JNIM, that creates uncertainty. Fighters can no longer assume that remote locations automatically provide protection. For local communities, the message is very different. Operations like this demonstrate that state security forces are willing and able to pursue threats beyond major towns and into areas that have long experienced instability. The battle in Bangasso was therefore not only about what was destroyed, it was about changing the balance of confidence. JNIM lost a place it depended on, while Burkina Faso gained another example of its growing ability to challenge extremist networks in one of the most contested parts of the country. What makes BIR-23 stand out is not simply its ability to win battles. Many military units can achieve success under favorable conditions. What separates elite formations from ordinary ones is their ability to produce results consistently in difficult environments. The Bangasso operation highlights several characteristics that have helped BIR-23 build a growing reputation across Burkina Faso. First is discipline. Rather than rushing toward a target, the unit appears to prioritize observation, preparation, and timing. This reduces unnecessary risks and increases the chances of success once an operation begins. Second is the emphasis on intelligence. Modern conflicts are often won by those who understand the battlefield better than their opponents. Knowing where a group is located, how it communicates, when it moves, and where it stores equipment can be more valuable than overwhelming firepower. BIR-23 has increasingly demonstrated the importance of information-driven operations. Third is initiative. In many conflicts, security forces spend most of their time reacting to attacks. BIR-23 represents a different approach. Instead of waiting for threats to emerge, it seeks to identify and disrupt them before they can act. This shift from reaction to prevention can significantly change the security environment over time. These qualities have helped transform the unit into more than a military formation. For many citizens, it has become a symbol of determination and national resilience. Each successful mission reinforces the belief that difficult areas can be stabilized and that extremist groups are not invincible. Perhaps the most important lesson is that effective military power is not measured only by weapons or numbers. It is measured by preparation, adaptability, and the ability to make sound decisions under pressure. In that sense, BIR-23 represents a broader transformation taking place within Burkina Faso's security strategy. To understand why operations such as Bangasso continue to attract attention across West Africa, it is important to look beyond the battlefield and examine the broader security philosophy that has emerged under Ibrahim Traore's leadership. One of the most significant shifts has been the move away from a purely defensive posture. For many years, security forces in the region were often forced to respond after attacks had already occurred. Armed groups would strike villages, disrupt transportation routes, or target military positions before disappearing into difficult terrain. This created a cycle in which the initiative frequently remained with the insurgents. The approach increasingly associated with Burkina Faso today seeks to reverse that dynamic. Rather than waiting for threats to appear, security forces aim to identify hostile networks, monitor their movements, and disrupt their operations before attacks can be launched. The Bangasso operation reflects this principle. Days of surveillance were followed by a carefully timed intervention designed to remove a threat before it could strengthen its position. This shift also reflects a broader emphasis on regaining control of territory. Security is not measured only by the absence of attacks. It is also measured by whether citizens can travel safely, cultivate farmland, conduct business, and maintain normal daily life. Every area restored to greater stability represents progress toward that objective. Equally important is the psychological dimension. Successful operations help strengthen public confidence in state institutions. When communities repeatedly witness security forces taking initiative and producing results, trust can begin to replace fear. That confidence becomes an important asset in its own right, because local populations are often essential sources of information and cooperation. For this reason, the significance of Bangasso extends beyond the immediate outcome. The operation serves as an example of how a new security mindset is being translated into action on the ground, combining intelligence, preparation, and persistence in pursuit of longer-term stability. While Ibrahim Traoré is often the most visible figure associated with Burkina Faso's security transformation, the developments taking place today extend beyond any single leader. They are increasingly connected to the broader vision emerging within the Alliance of Sahel states, commonly known as AES. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger face many of the same challenges. Armed groups move across borders, exploit remote terrain, and take advantage of gaps in regional coordination. Because these threats do not stop at national boundaries, the response cannot remain limited to individual countries acting alone. This reality has encouraged deeper cooperation among AES members. Intelligence sharing, military coordination, training initiatives, and joint security planning have become important components of the alliance's strategy. The objective is not simply to react to isolated incidents, but to create a more integrated approach to regional security. The Bangasso operation can be viewed through this wider lens. While the action itself occurred within Burkina Faso, its significance reaches beyond a single location. Every successful operation that weakens extremist networks contributes to the overall security environment of neighboring countries as well. For supporters of the AES project, this represents an important shift. Instead of relying primarily on external actors to define security priorities, member states are increasingly seeking to build solutions based on their own assessment of local realities. Whether one fully agrees with every aspect of this approach or not, it reflects a growing determination to develop regional capabilities from within. In that sense, Bangasso is more than a battlefield success. It is another example of how Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are attempting to transform shared security challenges into opportunities for deeper cooperation and greater self-reliance across the Sahel region. As Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger pursue a more independent security strategy, their approach continues to generate debate beyond the region. Some Western governments, analysts, and organizations have expressed concerns about governance, military influence in politics, and the long-term implications of the changes taking place across the Sahel. Critics argue that security operations alone cannot solve every challenge facing the region. They point to issues such as economic development, political reform, and human rights as factors that must also be addressed. These concerns remain part of the broader international discussion surrounding the future of the Sahel. At the same time, many citizens within the region view the situation through a different lens. For communities that have endured years of violence, displacement, and insecurity, The immediate question is often whether daily life is becoming safer. From this perspective, successful operations against armed groups carry significant weight because they directly affect the ability of families to work, travel, and live without fear. The reality is that both security and long-term development matter. Stability creates conditions for progress, while lasting progress helps reinforce stability. The challenge for Burkina Faso and its partners is to strengthen both at the same time. The operation in Bangasso illustrates why this debate continues. Supporters see evidence of growing capability and determination. Critics urge caution and broader reforms. Between these perspectives lies an important truth. Nations are ultimately judged not only by promises or criticism, but by the conditions experienced by their people on the ground. The operation in Bangasso will likely be remembered for more than the destruction of a single militant base. It represents a broader story unfolding across the Sahel, one that combines military adaptation, regional cooperation, and a growing belief in self-reliance. For Burkina Faso, the mission demonstrated the effectiveness of intelligence-driven operations. BIR-23 showed that patience, preparation, and precise execution can produce meaningful results against determined adversaries. The success also reinforced the unit's growing reputation as one of the most capable military formations in the region. At a deeper level, the operation reflected the security philosophy that has become increasingly associated with Ibrahim Traore's leadership. The emphasis on initiative rather than reaction, on reclaiming territory rather than merely defending it, and on strengthening local capabilities rather than relying exclusively on external solutions continues to shape the country's approach. The significance extends beyond Burkina Faso. Through the alliance of Sahel states, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are attempting to create a framework in which neighboring countries cooperate more closely to confront common threats. Whether this model ultimately achieves all of its goals remains to be seen, but its influence on regional discussions is already clear. Perhaps the most important lesson from Bangasso is that lasting change often begins with a series of determined actions. A single operation cannot solve every challenge facing the Sahel, yet each successful step can help create momentum, restore confidence, and open new possibilities for the future. For many supporters of Pan-African ideals, the events in Burkina Faso symbolize something larger than military success. They reflect an Africa new vision of responsibility, capability, and self-determination. Discussions about Pan-Africanism, the African Union, Captain Ibrahim Traore, and Ibrahim Traore himself continue to generate strong opinions, but they also highlight a growing conversation about how African nations can shape their own future. As Burkina Faso moves forward, many across the continent will be watching closely. If you found this analysis valuable, share your thoughts below and subscribe to the channel for more insights into the changing landscape of Africa and the Sahel. Just a few years ago, Burkina Faso was being described as one of the most dangerous places on Earth. International reports ranked it among the countries hardest hit by terrorism. Entire communities lived under constant fear. Armed groups expanded their influence across large parts of the country, and many analysts warned that the nation was moving toward collapse. At the time, headlines focused on growing insecurity, mass displacement, and the steady erosion of state authority. Millions of people were affected by the crisis. Schools closed their doors. Health centers stopped functioning. Families abandoned their homes, uncertain if they would ever return. For many observers, Burkina Faso appeared trapped in a downward spiral with no clear way out. What makes this story remarkable is what happened next. By 2025, international assessments began reporting something few expected. Burkina Faso recorded the largest reduction in terrorism-related deaths anywhere in the world. The same country that had become a symbol of insecurity was now being cited as an example of significant improvement in the fight against violent extremism. How did this happen? What changed inside a nation that many believed was already losing the battle? And why have the results forced even some of its harshest critics to pay attention? In this video, we will explore the crisis that pushed Burkina Faso to the edge, the leadership decisions that reshaped its security strategy, and the transformation that has turned one of the world's most troubled countries into a nation determined to reclaim its future. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel if you enjoy stories about Africa's transformation and the leaders reshaping its future. To understand the scale of this turnaround, we first need to return to the darkest years of Burkina Faso's crisis. Between 2019 and 2022, terrorist violence escalated dramatically. Large areas of the country became difficult to govern. Armed groups linked to regional extremist networks launched repeated attacks on villages, military positions, and transportation routes. Fear spread rapidly across the nation, and many international observers believed Burkina Faso was losing control of its own territory. When people discuss Burkina Faso's transformation, one name inevitably stands at the center of the conversation: Captain Ibrahim Traoré. When he took power in 2022, many outside observers were skeptical. He was young, relatively unknown on the international stage, and inheriting a country facing one of the worst security crises in the world. Terrorist attacks were increasing, public confidence was falling, and large portions of the population had been displaced from their homes. For critics, the outlook seemed bleak. Many predicted that Burkina Faso would continue down the same path of instability that had already consumed so much of the Sahel region. But Traoré chose a different approach. Rather than focusing primarily on international approval, he placed security at the center of his agenda. His message was straightforward. Burkina Faso could not depend entirely on outside powers to solve its problems. The country would need to strengthen its own institutions, rebuild its military capacity, and restore control over its territory through national effort. This philosophy became the foundation of a broader strategy built around sovereignty, self-reliance, and national mobilization. Supporters viewed this approach as a necessary response to years of worsening insecurity. They argued that previous methods had failed to stop the expansion of terrorist groups and that a new direction was needed. One of Traoré's most important decisions was to treat the security crisis as a national challenge rather than a problem for the military alone. The government increased recruitment efforts, expanded local defense initiatives, and encouraged greater participation from communities affected by violence. At the same time, Burkina Faso began diversifying its international partnerships. Instead of relying on a single group of foreign partners, the country explored relationships with a wider range of nations willing to provide military, economic, and technical cooperation. Whether one agrees with all of Traoré's policies or not, there is little doubt that his leadership marked a turning point. While many expected Burkina Faso to continue losing ground, the country began pursuing a strategy designed not merely to survive, but to reverse the trajectory of the conflict itself. The real test, however, would come on the battlefield, where strategy would have to be matched by results. If leadership provided the vision, military reform provided the mechanism that turned vision into action. One of the first priorities of Burkina Faso's new security strategy was rebuilding the country's ability to fight back. For years, terrorist groups had exploited vast distances, weak infrastructure, and limited military presence across large sections of the country. Security forces were often forced into a reactive posture, responding after attacks had already occurred. The new approach sought to change that reality. Recruitment efforts were expanded, bringing more personnel into the armed forces at a time when the security threat remained severe. Alongside the regular military, The government increased support for community-based defense initiatives and volunteer forces that could help improve local security and provide valuable intelligence. The goal was not simply to increase numbers. The objective was to create a broader national security network capable of responding more quickly to threats and maintaining a stronger presence in vulnerable regions. At the operational level, the military gradually shifted from defense to offense. Instead of focusing exclusively on protecting positions after attacks occurred, security forces launched more proactive operations aimed at disrupting extremist networks before they could strike. This strategy focused heavily on mobility, intelligence gathering, and territorial recovery. Areas that had long been considered difficult to secure became priorities for military operations. Supply routes received greater attention, while efforts were made to reconnect isolated communities with government services. The psychological impact was also significant. For years, terrorist organizations had benefited from the perception that they could move freely and operate without serious resistance. As military operations intensified, the message began to change. The state was no longer retreating. It was actively contesting territory and attempting to restore its authority. Success did not come overnight. The conflict remained complex, and serious security challenges persisted. However, the shift in strategy started producing visible changes on the ground. More communities began seeing a stronger security presence, and confidence gradually improved in areas where state authority had previously weakened. This military transformation laid the foundation for the next phase of Burkina Faso's security strategy, one that combined domestic reforms with new international partnerships and modern military capabilities. As Burkina Faso expanded its military operations, another important change was taking place behind the scenes. The country was working to modernize the tools available to its armed forces. For years, one of the biggest challenges facing security forces across the Sahel was mobility. Terrorist groups often operated across vast and difficult terrain, moving quickly between remote areas and exploiting gaps in security coverage. Fighting such networks required more than determination. It required modern equipment capable of supporting rapid and effective operations. This is where Burkina Faso's growing defense partnerships became increasingly important. Among the systems attracting international attention were Chinese-made armored vehicles, advanced mortar platforms, and modern rocket systems. These acquisitions represented a significant upgrade in capability compared with much of the equipment previously available to the armed forces. The VN-22B armored vehicle offered improved protection and mobility for troops operating in high-risk areas, in regions where ambushes and roadside attacks had become common. Better protection could mean the difference between success and failure during an operation. The PLL-05 self-propelled mortar system provided greater flexibility and fire support. Its combination of mobility and precision made it suitable for responding quickly to threats while supporting troops engaged in difficult terrain. Meanwhile, the SR-5 rocket system brought longer-range strike capabilities that could be used against larger concentrations of hostile forces. Such systems gave commanders additional options when planning operations across wide geographic areas. However, it is important to understand what these weapons did and did not accomplish. Military equipment alone does not defeat terrorism. No armored vehicle, rocket launcher, or artillery system can solve underlying security challenges by itself. Success depends on leadership, training, intelligence, logistics, coordination, and the ability to maintain control over recovered territory. What the new equipment provided was an important advantage. It strengthened the military's ability to implement its broader strategy and increased its capacity to respond to evolving threats. Combined with expanded recruitment, territorial operations, and regional cooperation, modernization became another piece of the larger effort to reverse years of insecurity, and gradually, measurable results began to emerge. For any government, military operations are ultimately judged by results. Strategies, speeches, and equipment matter. But the real question is simple. Did conditions improve on the ground? By 2025, a growing number of observers were forced to acknowledge that something significant was happening in Burkina Faso. International assessments reported that the country experienced the largest reduction in terrorism-related deaths anywhere in the world during that year. This was especially remarkable because Burkina Faso had previously been considered one of the global epicenters of terrorist violence. The numbers alone attracted attention, but statistics tell only part of the story. Behind those figures were communities that had spent years living under constant fear. In several areas, residents began returning to places they had previously been forced to abandon. Families that had fled violence started rebuilding their lives. Economic activity slowly resumed in locations where insecurity had disrupted daily life for years. The return of civilians is often one of the clearest indicators that security conditions are changing. People rarely return home because of political speeches. They return when they believe the risks have become lower, and the future appears more stable than the past. There were also signs of progress in territorial control. Security forces increased their presence in areas that had once been considered highly vulnerable. Transportation routes became easier to secure, and local authorities gradually expanded their ability to provide services in some previously isolated communities. None of this meant that Burkina Faso had solved every problem. The country continued to face serious security threats, humanitarian challenges, and economic pressures. Extremist groups remained active in parts of the region, and the situation was still far from perfect. Yet the broader trend was difficult to ignore. Only a few years earlier, many analysts were asking whether Burkina Faso could survive its security crisis. By 2025, the conversation had changed dramatically. The focus was no longer on imminent collapse. Instead, attention shifted toward understanding how such a significant improvement had been achieved. The country's experience was becoming one of the most closely watched security stories anywhere in Africa, and perhaps in the world. As Burkina Faso's security situation began to improve, a debate emerged that extended far beyond the country's borders. For years, many Western governments, media organizations, and policy experts had expressed concerns about the direction taken by Burkina Faso under Ibrahim Traoré. Critics questioned the country's political trajectory, warned about the risks associated with military-led governance, and raised concerns about human rights, democratic institutions, and international partnerships. Some observers argued that distancing the country from traditional Western security frameworks would weaken its ability to combat terrorism. Others predicted that new alliances and alternative security strategies would fail to produce meaningful results. Yet the developments that followed complicated those predictions. The reality was not a simple story of total success or total failure. Burkina Faso continued to face serious challenges. Terrorist groups remained active in parts of the country. Humanitarian needs were still significant. Economic pressures had not disappeared. At the same time, measurable improvements in security forced many analysts to reconsider earlier assumptions. This raised an uncomfortable question. If previous approaches had been fully effective, why had terrorism expanded so dramatically before 2022? For many supporters of Burkina Faso's current strategy, this question lies at the heart of the debate. They argue that the country did not choose a new path out of ideology alone. It chose a new path because the old one was not producing the results citizens desperately needed. The emergence of regional cooperation through the alliance of Sahel states further reinforced this perspective. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger increasingly emphasized local solutions to regional security challenges, seeking to build frameworks based on their own priorities rather than external expectations. TRAORE'S. The lesson may not be that one side was entirely right and the other entirely wrong. Instead, Burkina Faso's experience suggests that security strategies must ultimately be judged by outcomes. Political theories and international preferences matter. But citizens living under the threat of terrorism often care most about whether violence decreases and stability returns. That is why the story of Burkina Faso continues to attract global attention. It challenges assumptions, provokes debate, and forces observers to confront difficult questions about sovereignty, security, and the future of Africa's fight against extremism. The story of Burkina Faso is far from over. Challenges remain. Security threats have not disappeared. Economic pressures continue to test the country's resilience. Humanitarian needs still affect countless families, and no serious observer would claim that every problem has been solved. Yet focusing only on the difficulties would miss the larger significance of what has happened. Just a few years ago, Burkina Faso was widely portrayed as a country trapped in an endless cycle of violence. Many believed the state was losing control. Many predicted further decline. Some even questioned whether lasting stability was still possible. Today, the conversation is very different. The country that once symbolized the spread of terrorism in the Sahel is increasingly being discussed as a case study in security recovery. The country that many expected to fail has instead demonstrated that determined leadership, military reform, national mobilization, and strategic partnerships can alter the trajectory of a crisis. At the center of this transformation stands Ibrahim Traoré, a leader who remains controversial to some and inspiring to others. Regardless of political opinion, his role in reshaping Burkina Faso's direction has become impossible to ignore. Perhaps the most important lesson extends beyond Burkina Faso itself. Across Africa, many nations continue searching for solutions to challenges involving security, development, and sovereignty. Burkina Faso's experience suggests that lasting progress often begins when countries develop the confidence to define their own priorities, strengthen their own institutions, and pursue strategies rooted in their own realities. Whether this model can be sustained over the long term remains one of the most important questions facing the region. What cannot be denied is that Burkina Faso has already changed the conversation. For supporters of Pan-African progress, the developments in Burkina Faso represent more than a national story. They symbolize a broader discussion about self-determination, regional cooperation, and the future direction of Africa's new leadership movements. From the vision promoted by Captain Ibrahim Traoré to ongoing debates within the African Union, the themes of Pan-Africanism, sovereignty, and reform continue to shape the continent's future. And for many observers, the rise of Ibrahim Traoré has become one of the defining political stories of modern Burkina Faso. If you believe Africa's future should be shaped by Africans themselves, share your thoughts below and subscribe for more in-depth stories about the continent's transformation. We will see you in the next video. The explosions did not shock the Sahel. What shocked the region was how fast everything happened. Within hours of coordinated attacks in northern Mali, warplanes linked to the alliance of Sahel states moved into action. Targets were identified, airspace was coordinated, intelligence was shared, and for the first time, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger responded not like three separate governments, but like one military structure operating across borders. That is the real story. For years, the Sahel was known for fragmented responses, delayed operations, and international missions that often struggled to react quickly enough to fast-moving insurgent groups. Armed factions learned how to exploit borders, bureaucracy, and hesitation. They survived by moving faster than governments could coordinate. But now something appears to be changing. The Alliance of Sahel States, also known as AES, is beginning to act with a level of coordination that many observers did not expect to see this quickly. And whether people support or oppose these governments, one fact is becoming difficult to ignore. The military landscape of the Sahel may be entering an entirely new phase. This is no longer only about isolated counter-terrorism operations. It is about the possible birth of a regional military system built and controlled inside Africa itself. And that possibility is making many actors nervous. Because if AES can sustain this level of coordination, the balance of security power in West Africa could slowly begin to shift away from older international models and toward a new regional structure driven directly by Sahel states themselves. For the first time in many years, some Africans are asking a different question, not whether outside powers will stabilize the Sahel, but whether the Sahel is preparing to stabilize itself. If you follow Africa's changing future, subscribe, because what is happening now may reshape the continent for decades. At the beginning, many observers viewed the Alliance of Sahel States as mostly political. A declaration, a message of resistance, a symbolic partnership between Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, after growing tensions with ECOWAS, France, and several Western security structures. But recent events suggest that AES is becoming something very different. What the region is now witnessing is not simply diplomatic coordination. It is the early formation of a functioning military framework capable of acting across borders with shared objectives and synchronized timing. That distinction matters enormously. For decades, security operations in the Sahel were usually handled country by country. Even when neighboring states faced the same insurgent threats, military responses often remained fragmented. Intelligence moved slowly. Operations required separate approvals. Coordination was limited. Armed groups learned how to exploit those gaps. AES appears to be trying to eliminate them. The recent air operations demonstrated several things at once. Intelligence was shared quickly. Airspace coordination was possible between multiple governments. Decisions were made rapidly, and military pressure was applied almost simultaneously. That is no longer symbolic cooperation. That is operational coordination. And once a regional alliance reaches that stage, the strategic environment begins to change. Because enemies are no longer calculating the response of a single nation. They are calculating the possible response of an entire regional bloc acting together. That creates a very different kind of pressure. For armed groups operating across the Sahel, borders once created breathing room. Fighters could relocate. Networks could reorganize. Delays between governments created time. But if AES continues functioning this way, those gaps may begin to shrink. And that may be the most important military development the Sahel has seen in years. The most dangerous advantage in modern conflict is not always firepower. Sometimes it is speed. And that may be exactly what the Alliance of Sahel States is trying to build. The recent military response inside Mali was not remarkable only because airstrikes happened. Airstrikes happen in many conflicts around the world. What made this situation different was the timeline. Operations reportedly began within hours after coordinated attacks in the north. That level of reaction does not happen through improvisation. It suggests that communication systems were already active. Intelligence channels were already functioning. Military leadership already understood who would respond, how they would respond, and how quickly decisions could be approved. That changes everything. For years, one of the biggest weaknesses in Sahel security operations was delay. Information often moved through multiple bureaucratic layers before action was taken. By the time responses were organized, armed groups had already relocated or disappeared into border regions. AES appears to be attempting a completely different model. Instead of waiting for slow international coordination, decisions are being pushed closer to the battlefield itself. And in asymmetric warfare, that can become a massive strategic advantage. Because insurgent groups survive through mobility, they rely on time. Time to escape. Time to reorganize. Time to exploit confusion between neighboring states. But when three governments coordinate rapidly, those windows begin to close. This is why the speed of the response matters more than the number of aircraft involved. It signals the existence of a structure capable of immediate action. And for many Africans watching the Sahel, this feels historically important. For the first time in a long time, regional security decisions appear to be happening inside the region itself, shaped by governments facing the threat directly, instead of distant international systems operating far from the battlefield. The growing coordination inside the alliance of Sahel states is not only changing military calculations, it is also creating anxiety among armed groups, regional rivals, and even some international powers watching the region closely. Because the real fear is not one successful operation. The real fear is what happens if this becomes normal. For years, many insurgent groups survived by exploiting geography. Borders across the Sahel were often difficult to control. Fighters could move between remote regions, reorganize networks, and avoid concentrated military pressure by crossing from one national territory into another. That environment created flexibility. But a coordinated AES changes that equation. If Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger begin operating as a synchronized security space, movement becomes more dangerous for armed factions. Pressure can emerge from multiple directions at the same time. Escape routes become less predictable. Delays become shorter, and uncertainty begins to grow for groups that once relied on fragmented government responses. That is why reactions from Tuareg separatist groups were immediate and highly focused on the involvement of Burkina Faso and Niger, because their participation changes the battlefield itself. But concern is not limited to insurgent groups alone. International observers are also paying close attention because AES represents something larger than counterterrorism operations. It represents the possibility of a regional military structure developing outside many traditional Western-led security frameworks. And that possibility carries geopolitical consequences. If AES succeeds in sustaining rapid coordination, some countries may begin asking difficult questions about the future role of older international security models in Africa. That is why this moment matters beyond Mali. It touches the broader balance of influence inside West Africa itself. The concern now is not whether AES can launch one operation. The concern is whether it is building a military system capable of repeating this kind of response again and again under growing pressure. No figure represents the new political mood inside the Sahel more strongly than Captain Ibrahim Traoré. To many supporters across Africa, he symbolizes a generation that no longer wants the continent's security future designed somewhere else. His speeches, public image, and political messaging consistently focus on sovereignty, self-reliance, and the idea that African nations must develop the ability to defend themselves without permanent dependence on outside powers. That message connects deeply inside the Sahel. Because for many people in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, years of international military involvement did not bring the level of stability they had hoped for. Violence expanded. Armed groups adapted. Entire communities continued to live under insecurity. As frustration grew, leaders like Ibrahim Traoré began presenting a different vision, a vision where African states cooperate directly with one another, share intelligence, coordinate military action, and respond to threats using structures controlled inside the region itself. That is one reason the alliance of Sahel states carries emotional weight far beyond military strategy. 2. Supporters. AES is not simply a security pact. It represents dignity, independence, and the belief that African nations should have the power to make urgent security decisions without waiting for approval from distant capitals. This is also why Pan-Africanism has become closely connected to the image of AES. Many young Africans now see the alliance as proof that regional cooperation can move beyond speeches and become operational reality. But there is also an important counter-argument. Symbols alone cannot stabilize a region. Strong speeches cannot replace logistics, training, intelligence networks, or economic resilience. If security conditions fail to improve over time, public enthusiasm could face serious pressure. And that may become the greatest challenge facing Ibrahim Traore and the broader AES project. Inspiration can unite people, but only long-term results can transform a powerful symbol into lasting history. The rise of the alliance of Sahel states has triggered mixed reactions far beyond West Africa. Supporters describe AES as a necessary step toward African security independence. Critics, especially in parts of the Western political and media landscape, see something far more concerning. One major criticism focuses on military rule. Western governments and international organizations have repeatedly warned that prolonged military leadership could weaken democratic institutions inside Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Others fear that intensified regional military operations could increase instability or create new humanitarian risks if conflicts continue expanding across borders. There is also a strategic concern beneath the political language. For decades, security policy in the Sahel involved heavy international influence through military partnerships, intelligence support, and foreign deployments. But AES is attempting to build a regional security system that answers primarily to Sahel governments themselves. And that shift could gradually reduce outside influence in one of Africa's most strategically important regions. However, many people inside the Sahel present a different argument. They point out that despite years of international operations, insecurity continued spreading across large parts of the region. Armed groups became more organized, civilian displacement increased, and public frustration slowly grew. For many citizens, AES did not emerge because people rejected cooperation with the outside world. It emerged because confidence in older security models had weakened. That distinction is important. This is not simply a military disagreement between Africa and the West. It is also a debate about who should control security decisions inside African territories. And there may be lessons here for other African nations. The first lesson is that regional cooperation matters. Armed groups move across borders, so intelligence and military coordination may also need to cross borders. The second lesson is that speed matters as much as weapons. Delayed decisions can become strategic weaknesses. But there is also a final lesson. Sovereignty cannot survive on emotion alone. Any nation seeking true security independence must still build strong institutions, logistics, communication systems, and long-term economic stability. Whether the alliance of Sahel states succeeds or fails will not be decided by one operation. History is shaped by repetition. Right now, AES has demonstrated something important. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger have shown they can coordinate military action quickly, share operational responsibilities, and respond to threats with a level of synchronization many observers did not expect this soon. That alone is already changing perceptions across the Sahel. Because once a regional military structure proves it can function in real time, expectations begin to rise. Governments study it, armed groups adapt to it, foreign powers begin recalculating their influence in West Africa. But the real test is only beginning. Maintaining rapid coordination under long-term pressure is far harder than achieving it once. Over time, every alliance faces strain. Logistics become difficult. Economic pressure grows. Political priorities can slowly diverge. That is where military alliances either evolve into stable systems or begin to fracture. Still, many Africans are watching this moment with cautious optimism. For decades, African security discussions often centered around dependency and foreign intervention. AES is trying to present another vision, a vision where regional states cooperate directly, build military capability together, and define security priorities from inside Africa itself. Whether that vision succeeds remains uncertain, but its symbolic importance is already undeniable. Across Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, supporters increasingly connect this moment to Pan-African hopes for a more independent future. Many believe Africa New must eventually include African control over African security decisions. That is why figures like Captain Ibrahim Traoré have become closely linked to this movement. The African Union and neighboring states are watching carefully because the outcome may influence future regional alliances across the continent. If Pan-Africanism can move from speeches into real coordination, Ibrahim Traoré and the AES alliance may reshape how the world sees African power in the Sahel. If you believe Africa is entering a new chapter, subscribe and stay with us because the story of the Sahel is only beginning. Just a few years ago, the idea of Burkina Faso turning one of the most dangerous corners of the Sahel into a fortified stronghold would have sounded impossible. In many parts of the country, armed groups moved freely, entire communities lived under constant fear, and government authorities struggled to reach remote regions. Yet today, a very different story is unfolding in a place called Petegoli. What makes this story remarkable is not simply that Burkina Faso repelled another attack. It is that a coalition of JNIM and Islamic State Sahel elements reportedly launched a counteroffensive aimed at challenging Burkinabe positions, only to be pushed back while leaving behind weapons, communication equipment, drones, supplies, and valuable logistical assets. For many observers, this battle represents far more than a tactical victory. It symbolizes a nation determined to reclaim territory that once seemed lost. At the center of this transformation stands Captain Ibrahim Traoré, a leader whose supporters argue has reshaped Burkina Faso's military doctrine and restored confidence in the country's ability to defend itself. But is Petegoli truly evidence that the balance of power in the Sahel is changing? And could this remote frontier become the symbol of a new era for Burkina Faso? Before we begin, if you enjoy in-depth analysis of African security, leadership, and transformation stories, make sure to follow the channel so you never miss our future reports. Petegoli is not a name that appears often in international headlines. It is not a major capital city, nor is it a famous economic center. Yet in the security landscape of the Sahel, this small location carries enormous strategic importance. To understand why the recent events there matter so much, we must first understand where Petegoli sits and why armed groups have fought so hard to control it. Located within Burkina Faso's Soum province, Petegoli lies near one of the most sensitive regions in West Africa. This area forms part of the broader zone connecting Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, a region often described by security analysts as the heart of the Sahel conflict. For years, extremist organizations exploited these vast borderlands because government presence was weak. Populations were scattered, and movement across frontiers was difficult to monitor. In practical terms, controlling a place like Petegoli means controlling access routes. Armed groups can move fighters, transport weapons, gather intelligence, and establish logistical networks through such corridors. That is why organizations like JNIM and Islamic State Sahel have repeatedly sought influence in this region. They understand that territory is more than land. Territory provides mobility, resources, and strategic depth for local communities. However, the consequences have been devastating. Many families have lived under years of uncertainty. Farmers worried about reaching their fields. Traders feared traveling between villages. Entire communities learned to live with the possibility of sudden violence. When Burkina Faso's forces recaptured Petegoli in March 2026, they were not simply reclaiming a point on a map. They were sending a message that state authority could return to places long associated with insecurity. The significance of that operation extends beyond military gains. It represents an attempt to restore confidence among citizens who have spent years wondering whether their government could truly protect them. That is why Petegoli has become far more than a village. It has become a symbol of a larger struggle over the future of Burkina Faso and the wider Sahel. The forces that attacked Petegoli did not choose their target by accident. From their perspective, retaking the area would have carried enormous military and psychological value. A successful operation could have disrupted Burkina Faso's defensive lines, weakened confidence in government forces, and reopened an important corridor for future militant activity across the wider Sahel region. According to reports surrounding the operation, the attackers attempted to challenge the defensive positions established after Burkina Faso regained control of the area. This follows a pattern often seen throughout the Sahel. Armed groups rarely abandon strategically important territory without attempting to test the strength of newly established security positions. Typically, such efforts begin with reconnaissance. Information is gathered through local networks, surveillance activities, and increasingly through commercially available drones. Once weaknesses are identified, sabotage operations may follow. The objective is to create uncertainty, disrupt communications, and expose vulnerabilities before launching a larger assault. What appears to make the Petegoli case different is the response. Instead of allowing the attackers to build momentum, Burkina Faso's forces reportedly reacted quickly and effectively. Elements of the Rapid Intervention Brigade, supported by local defense volunteers, maintained pressure on the attackers and prevented them from achieving their objectives. The aftermath tells an important story. Reports indicate that weapons, ammunition, communication devices, drone equipment, medical supplies, food stocks, and other logistical materials were recovered after the failed assault. Such losses are significant because insurgent groups operating in remote regions depend heavily on mobility and supply networks. Every abandoned radio, every lost drone, and every captured stockpile represents a setback that can affect future operations. More importantly, the failed counteroffensive delivered a symbolic message. For years, armed groups often dictated the pace of conflict across large portions of the Sahel. In Petegoli, however, they encountered a defensive system that was prepared, organized, and determined to hold its ground. That reality may prove more important than the battlefield statistics themselves. To fully appreciate the significance of Petegoli, it is important to remember where Burkina Faso stood only a few years ago. Today, discussions often focus on drones, rapid intervention units, and territorial recovery. But not long ago, the country's security forces faced a completely different reality. Large sections of the nation were under constant pressure from insurgent attacks. Military units frequently struggled with shortages of equipment, transportation, protective gear, and surveillance capabilities. In many remote areas, The state lacked the tools needed to monitor movements across vast stretches of difficult terrain. Armed groups exploited these weaknesses and expanded their influence in regions that should have been under government control. Supporters of Captain Ibrahim Traoré often point to this period when discussing the country's transformation. They argue that one of the most important changes was not simply acquiring new military hardware, but changing the mindset of the security establishment. Instead of reacting to attacks after they occurred, the focus shifted toward anticipating threats and maintaining constant awareness of the battlefield. A major part of that transformation involved the expansion of drone capabilities. Modern unmanned aerial systems provided something Burkina Faso had long needed: the ability to observe remote regions, track suspicious movements, and respond more rapidly to emerging threats. Combined with the growth of rapid intervention brigade units, these capabilities helped create a more flexible and mobile security structure. The contrast is striking. A military once associated with limited resources is now increasingly linked with surveillance technology, rapid deployment forces, and coordinated territorial defense. While challenges remain, and security threats have certainly not disappeared, the difference between the Burkina Faso of a few years ago and the Burkina Faso of today is difficult to ignore. For many citizens, the story of Petegoli reflects that larger transformation. It is not simply about military modernization. It is about a nation attempting to prove that it can protect its territory, defend its communities, and shape its own future without depending entirely on others to secure its borders. One of the most interesting aspects of the Petegoli story is that it reflects a broader strategic philosophy associated with Captain Ibrahim Traoré. In many conflicts around the world, armies succeed in capturing territory only to lose it again weeks or months later. Temporary victories may generate headlines, but they rarely change the overall security situation. What appears different in Burkina Faso's recent approach is the emphasis on holding ground after it has been recovered. This strategy is built on a simple principle. A territory is not truly liberated if government authority disappears the moment military operations end. Security forces must remain present, supply routes must remain open, local populations must feel protected, administrative structures must eventually return. Without these elements, insurgent groups can simply wait for an opportunity to come back. Petegoli offers an example of this approach in practice. After the area was brought back under government control, the objective was not merely to celebrate a victory and move elsewhere. Instead, security positions were reinforced, defensive lines were consolidated, and local defense structures worked alongside regular forces to maintain stability. The goal was to transform a vulnerable frontier into a permanent security zone. Supporters of Traoré argue that this reflects a deeper understanding of the conflict. They believe the struggle in the Sahel is not only about winning battles, it is about rebuilding state presence in regions where citizens have long felt abandoned. Every secured road, every protected village, and every functioning local administration becomes part of a larger effort to reclaim national territory. For many observers, this is why Petegoli matters. The battle itself may eventually fade from memory, but the strategy behind it could have lasting consequences. If Burkina Faso succeeds in consistently holding and stabilizing areas once dominated by armed groups, the country may gradually reshape the security landscape of the Sahel. In that sense, Petegoli is not simply a military achievement. It is a test of whether a new model of territorial defense can succeed where previous approaches struggled. Why do so many ordinary citizens continue to support Ibrahim Traoré, despite the controversy that often surrounds his government? The answer depends largely on where the question is being asked. For many people living far from the conflict zones, debates often focus on politics, elections, and international relations. For families living near the front lines, However, the priorities can be very different. In communities affected by years of violence, security is not an abstract concept. It determines whether farmers can reach their fields, whether merchants can travel safely to markets, and whether children can attend school without fear. When people spend years facing insecurity, they often judge leadership through the lens of daily survival rather than political theory. This helps explain why operations like the defense of Petegoli resonate so strongly with many Burkinabe citizens. They see evidence that the state is attempting to return to areas that once appeared abandoned. They see security forces maintaining a presence where armed groups previously operated with relative freedom, whether one agrees with every policy or not. These visible changes influence public perception. At the same time, Burkina Faso continues to face criticism from Western governments, international organizations, and human rights groups. Critics raise concerns about democratic governance, press freedom, and allegations connected to counterinsurgency operations. These concerns remain part of the broader international debate surrounding the country's direction. Supporters of Traoré respond that such discussions cannot be separated from the security realities facing Burkina Faso. They argue that a government confronting an active insurgency must first ensure national survival before it can address every other challenge. In their view, stability creates the foundation upon which political and economic progress can eventually be built. The result is a complex debate with no simple answers. International observers often emphasize democratic standards and institutional concerns. Many local citizens focus on safety, territorial control, and the restoration of normal life. Understanding Burkina Faso today requires recognizing both perspectives, because each reflects a different experience of the same conflict. As the dust settles over Petegoli, one question remains. Are we witnessing a single battlefield success, or the early signs of a deeper transformation taking place across Burkina Faso and the wider Sahel? The failed counteroffensive by JNIM and Islamic State Sahel forces demonstrated that the security environment is changing. A location that once symbolized vulnerability has become a test case for a different approach to territorial defense. The combination of rapid response forces, stronger battlefield awareness, local support structures, and a determination to hold recovered territory has given Burkina Faso an opportunity to challenge long-standing assumptions about the conflict. Yet the road ahead remains difficult. Armed groups continue to operate across parts of the Sahel, and lasting stability will require more than military victories alone. It will demand development, governance, economic opportunity, and continued trust between citizens and the state. Still, Petegoli carries a message that extends far beyond one village. For many supporters, it represents the belief that Burkina Faso can chart its own course, defend its own territory, and pursue its own vision of sovereignty, whether viewed through the lens of security, leadership, or national pride. The story has become closely linked with Pan-African aspirations and debates about the future of the continent. As Africa enters a new chapter, many eyes will remain fixed on Burkina Faso, the African Union, the ideals of Pan-Africanism, and the leadership of Captain Ibrahim Traoré. Whether history ultimately judges Ibrahim Traoré as a transformational figure remains to be seen, but Petegoli has already become part of that story. If you enjoyed this analysis of African new developments and the changing realities of the Sahel, be sure to follow the channel and join us for future discussions. What happens when one of West Africa's most respected economic strategists shakes hands with one of the continent's most influential voices for sovereignty and security? Could this meeting become the beginning of a new chapter for the entire region? That question is now being asked across West Africa following the highly anticipated visit of President Romuald Wadagni of Benin to Burkina Faso, where he was personally welcomed by Captain Ibrahim Traoré. While many diplomatic visits come and go without leaving a lasting impact, this one appears different. At a time when terrorism continues to threaten communities across the Sahel and neighboring coastal states, the meeting between these two leaders has sparked discussions about a possible new era of cooperation. For many observers, this was not simply a ceremonial exchange between two heads of state. It was a meeting between two leaders who represent different strengths but face the same regional challenges. One is widely known for his economic expertise and development vision. The other has become a symbol of determination in the fight against insecurity and extremism. Together, they discussed security, trade, regional stability, and economic development. The timing of this visit is particularly important. Across West Africa, governments are searching for practical solutions to growing security threats, while also trying to create opportunities for economic growth. Many people now believe that stronger cooperation between Benin and Burkina Faso could help address both objectives at the same time. In this report, we will examine why this meeting matters, why it is attracting attention across the region, and whether the partnership between Romuald Wadagni and Ibrahim Traoré could influence the future direction of West Africa. If you enjoy following the events shaping Africa's future, be sure to subscribe to the channel and join us for more analysis. To understand why this visit generated so much interest, we must first understand the role of Romuald Wadagni. Before becoming president of Benin, he earned a reputation as one of the country's leading economic reformers. His career was built around financial management, investment planning, and policies designed to strengthen Benin's economy. This background helps explain his approach to leadership, rather than viewing security and economic growth as separate issues. Wadagni sees them as closely connected. Economic development requires stability. Investors need safe environments. Trade depends on secure transportation routes. Communities cannot prosper when insecurity threatens daily life. For that reason, his outreach to neighboring countries shortly after taking office was not accidental. It reflected a strategic understanding that Benin's future is linked to the stability of the wider region. His decision to engage directly with leaders in the Sahel signals a willingness to pursue cooperation where common interests exist. That is why his arrival in Ouagadougou was more than a diplomatic visit. It was a message that Benin may be preparing to play a larger role in shaping the future of West Africa. Captain Ibrahim Traoré has become one of the most closely watched leaders in Africa, and understanding his role helps explain why the visit from President Romuald Wadagni attracted so much attention. Over the past few years, Burkina Faso has found itself on the front line of the struggle against extremist violence in the Sahel. Faced with growing security threats, Traoré emerged as a leader determined to place national security and sovereignty at the center of government policy. His message has been consistent. No nation can defeat terrorism alone, and no country can build lasting prosperity while communities live under constant threat. This position has earned him support among many Africans who believe the continent must take greater responsibility for solving its own challenges. Whether people agree with all of his policies or not, few can deny that he has become an influential voice in discussions about the future of the Sahels. For Benin, Traoré's experience carries particular importance. In recent years, extremist groups operating in the wider Sahel have expanded their activities toward coastal countries. Northern Benin has increasingly faced security concerns linked to instability beyond its borders. This means that cooperation with countries already confronting these threats is becoming more valuable than ever. The significance of Traoré personally welcoming Wadagni should not be overlooked. Such gestures often send powerful diplomatic messages. In this case, the welcome suggested a willingness to strengthen dialogue, expand cooperation, and search for common solutions despite political differences that may have existed in the past. More importantly, the meeting highlighted a growing realization across West Africa. Security and development are no longer separate conversations. A secure region creates opportunities for trade, investment, infrastructure projects, and job creation. An unstable region threatens them all. By bringing together Benin's economic vision and Burkina Faso's security experience, Ouadagni and Traoré may be laying the groundwork for a partnership built on practical interests rather than political labels. The handshake between Romuald Ouadagni and Ibrahim Traoré carries significance far beyond the images seen at the presidential palace in Ouagadougou. For many analysts, it represents a possible shift in the political landscape of West Africa, where security realities are increasingly encouraging countries to cooperate despite past disagreements. For several years, relations between the alliance of Sahel states and some neighboring countries followed different political paths. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger focused on building new regional structures through the alliance of Sahel states, while other countries maintained different diplomatic priorities. As a result, many observers spoke about growing divisions across the region. However, the rise of terrorist threats has begun to change the conversation. Extremist groups do not recognize political boundaries. They move across borders, exploit weak security zones, and threaten communities regardless of national affiliations. This shared danger is creating powerful incentives for governments to work together. In that context, the meeting between Ouadagni and Traoré sends a clear message. It suggests that practical cooperation may be becoming more important than political differences. Security challenges require coordination, intelligence sharing, border management, and constant communication among neighboring countries. The visit also raises an important possibility. Benin could emerge as a bridge between coastal states and the alliance of Sahel states. Such a role would allow Benin to support regional dialogue while protecting its own national interests. Given its geographic position and economic importance, Benin is uniquely placed to encourage cooperation between different parts of West Africa. Perhaps the most powerful aspect of this meeting is its symbolism. For years, headlines often focused on disagreement and division. This visit offered a different image. It showed two leaders discussing common challenges and exploring common solutions. Whether the partnership ultimately transforms the region remains to be seen. But the message was unmistakable. Dialogue remains possible, cooperation remains valuable, and shared interests may prove stronger than political differences. That is why many people across West Africa are paying close attention. The handshake between Ouadagni and Traoré may ultimately be remembered not simply as a diplomatic gesture, but as the beginning of a new conversation about the future of regional unity and security. While diplomatic meetings often focus on ceremonies and official statements, the reality facing West Africa today is far more urgent. Across large parts of the Sahel, terrorist organizations continue to expand their operations, creating one of the most serious security challenges the region has faced in decades. Groups linked to violent extremism have learned how to exploit vast border areas, limited infrastructure, and weak state presence in remote communities. Their operations are no longer confined to a single country. Instead, they move across borders, taking advantage of gaps in regional coordination. This is why security experts increasingly describe terrorism in West Africa as a regional problem that requires regional solutions. For Benin, the threat has become impossible to ignore. In recent years, Northern areas of the country have experienced growing pressure from extremist networks operating near the borders with Burkina Faso and Niger. What was once viewed as a challenge concentrated in the Sahel is now affecting coastal states as well. Communities that previously felt distant from the conflict are becoming more exposed to instability. This reality helps explain why cooperation between Burkina Faso, Niger, and Benin is receiving so much attention. All three countries face a common threat, even if they experience it in different ways: information sharing, border coordination, joint planning, and stronger communication can significantly improve their ability to respond. The meeting between Wadagni and Traore reflects this growing understanding. Neither country can fully secure its future without support from its neighbors. Terrorist groups operate across borders, so efforts to stop them must do the same. Perhaps most importantly, the fight against terrorism is about more than military operations. It is about protecting families, preserving trade routes, supporting local economies, and creating conditions where young people can see opportunities instead of conflict. Security has become the foundation upon which every other development goal depends. As a result, the growing partnership between Benin and Burkina Faso may represent more than diplomacy. It may be part of a broader effort to create a safer and more stable future for the entire region, beyond security cooperation. Another important reason this visit matters is economics. In fact, many analysts believe that economic interests may become one of the strongest foundations of the growing relationship between Benin and Burkina Faso. One of the most strategic assets in this discussion is the port of Cotonou. Located on the Atlantic coast, it serves as a critical gateway for trade entering and leaving several countries in the region. For a landlocked nation such as Burkina Faso, reliable access to international markets is essential for economic growth, industrial development, and the movement of vital goods. Every year, large volumes of food products, fuel, construction materials, machinery, and consumer goods pass through transportation corridors connected to Benin. When these routes operate efficiently, businesses benefit, prices remain more stable, and economic activity expands. When insecurity disrupts transportation networks, the consequences are felt throughout the region. This is where security and economics become closely connected. A safer corridor means more trade. More trade creates jobs, attracts investment, and generates government revenue that can be used for development projects. For both Benin and Burkina Faso, protecting strategic transport routes is not simply a security objective. It is an economic necessity. The discussions between Wadagni and Traore reflected this reality. Both leaders understand that long-term prosperity depends on cooperation. Burkina Faso needs reliable access to coastal trade routes, while Benin benefits from stronger commercial links with the Sahel. Their interests are different in some respects, but they are also highly complementary. For ordinary citizens, the benefits could be significant. Stronger economic cooperation can support local businesses, improve regional commerce, encourage infrastructure development, and create opportunities for future generations. This is one reason why many observers see the partnership as more than a diplomatic initiative. It represents an effort to connect security, trade, and development into a single regional vision. As the relationship between Benin and Burkina Faso grows closer, not everyone is viewing these developments in the same way. Some Western analysts and international observers have expressed concerns about the changing political landscape in West Africa, particularly regarding the rise of the Alliance of Sahel states and the emergence of new regional partnerships. One common criticism is that the creation of alternative regional structures could weaken existing frameworks for cooperation. Others argue that stronger emphasis on sovereignty may reduce engagement with traditional international partners. Some analysts also question whether governments facing security threats can balance defense spending with long-term economic development. These concerns deserve consideration, but they also require context. The reality facing many countries in the Sahel is that security threats have reached levels that directly affect daily life, economic activity, and national stability. Without security, development projects become difficult to sustain. Schools close, businesses struggle, investment declines, and communities face increasing uncertainty. From this perspective, prioritizing security is not necessarily a rejection of development. Instead, many leaders see it as a prerequisite for development. A country cannot fully benefit from trade, education, healthcare, or infrastructure programs if large portions of its territory remain vulnerable to violence. Another important point is that sovereignty does not automatically mean isolation. Countries can seek greater control over their national decisions while continuing to cooperate with regional and international partners. In fact, the meeting between Wadagni and Traore demonstrates exactly that principle. Rather than withdrawing from engagement, both leaders are expanding dialogue and building new partnerships based on shared interests. Ultimately, the most important measure of success will not be political rhetoric. It will be results. Are communities becoming safer? Is trade increasing? Are jobs being created? Are living conditions improving? These are the questions that will determine whether this new approach delivers lasting benefits for the people of West Africa. The visit of President Romuald Wadagni to Burkina Faso may eventually be remembered as more than a diplomatic event. It brought together two leaders whose priorities reflect the most important challenges facing West Africa today. On one side stands a leader focused on economic growth, investment, and development. On the other stands a leader known for emphasizing security, sovereignty, and regional resilience. Their meeting demonstrated that these goals are not competing priorities. They are deeply connected. Throughout this report, we have seen how terrorism continues to threaten communities across the region, how economic corridors remain vital for prosperity, and how cooperation between neighboring countries has become increasingly necessary. The discussions between Wadagni and Traore highlighted a growing recognition that no nation can fully succeed in isolation. Security, trade, and development now depend on stronger regional partnerships. The broader lesson extends beyond Benin and Burkina Faso. Many African nations face similar challenges. The ability to cooperate while protecting national interests may become one of the defining factors shaping the continent's future. Dialogue, coordination, and practical solutions often achieve more than division and confrontation. Whether this meeting ultimately becomes a historic turning point will depend on the actions that follow. Agreements must lead to results. Partnerships must produce tangible benefits for ordinary citizens. Success will be measured by safer communities, stronger economies, and greater opportunities for future generations. For supporters of Pan-African cooperation, this moment offers an encouraging example of what can happen when leaders choose common interests over political differences. As Burkina Faso and Benin strengthen ties, many observers will be watching closely to see whether this spirit of collaboration influences the wider region. The vision often associated with Captain Ibrahim Traore, the aspirations of Pan-Africanism, the role of the African Union, and the emergence of an Africa new built on cooperation rather than division, all connect to this larger story. Time will tell how far this partnership goes, but the handshake between Romuald Wadagni and Ibrahim Traore has already sparked an important conversation about the future of West Africa. If you believe stronger cooperation can help create a more stable and prosperous future for Africa, let us know your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to the channel and join us for our next report. What happens when fighter jets are striking targets across Gao, Kidal, Kayes, and Buguni, while at the very same moment, a national leader chooses to travel through one of the most dangerous roads in the Sahel? That question is now being asked across West Africa after images emerged of Captain Ibrahim Traore traveling alongside troops on the Dédougou-Solenzo route, an area that has faced years of security threats, roadside explosives, and terrorist activity. At the same time, the Malian armed forces have intensified military operations across several strategic regions. Reports from the battlefield indicate precision strikes against militant positions, logistics hubs, weapon storage sites, and networks believed to support terrorist activities, from Gao in the east to Kidal in the north, from Kayes in the west to Buguni in the south. Mali appears determined to increase pressure on armed groups operating across the country. But this story is bigger than military operations alone. It is about leadership under pressure. It is about the changing security landscape of the Sahel. And it is about a growing message coming from the countries of the Alliance of Sahel states that they intend to confront security threats on their own terms. Before we begin, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you never miss important developments shaping the future of Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and the wider Sahel region. The first thing that stands out is the scale of Mali's recent operations. Instead of focusing on a single area, military pressure has reportedly been applied across multiple regions simultaneously. In Gao, security forces targeted locations believed to be linked to armed networks. In Kidal, continued surveillance and strike operations aimed to limit the movement of hostile elements. In Kayes, military attention focused on locations suspected of supporting retreat and resupply activities. Meanwhile, in Buguni, security forces disrupted an alleged attempt to place explosive devices along an important transportation corridor. Taken together, these operations reveal something important. Mali is no longer presenting these actions as isolated responses to attacks. The pattern suggests a broader strategy aimed at weakening the infrastructure that allows armed groups to operate, move, communicate, and sustain themselves across vast areas of territory. To understand why Mali has concentrated military pressure on Gao, Kidal, Kayes, and Buguni, it is necessary to look beyond the headlines and examine the strategic value of these locations. Gao has long been one of the most important cities in northern Mali. Positioned along major transportation routes, it serves as a gateway connecting different parts of the country. Control of Gao influences the movement of people, supplies, and security forces. For armed groups, access to areas around Gao can provide opportunities to move resources and maintain operational flexibility. For the state, maintaining control of Gao is essential for preserving national cohesion and projecting authority into remote regions. Kidal carries a different but equally significant importance. For years, the region has been associated with insurgent activity, armed movements, and difficult terrain that complicates security operations. Because of its location and history, Kidal has often been viewed as a symbolic and strategic center in the struggle for stability in northern Mali. Any effort to limit militant freedom of movement in this region carries both military and political significance. Further west lies Kayes, a region frequently described as an economic lifeline. Important commercial routes pass through the area, linking Mali with neighboring countries and international markets. Disruptions in Kayes can affect transportation, trade, fuel supplies, and economic activity far beyond the region itself. This makes security in Ks a national concern, rather than a purely local issue. In the south, Buguni occupies a key position along transportation corridors that support both civilian and military movement. Protecting these routes is critical because armed groups often target roads and infrastructure to create fear, slow economic activity, and undermine confidence in government authority. Viewed together, these four locations form a network of strategic points. By focusing attention on them simultaneously, Mali appears to be targeting not just individual threats, but the geographic foundations that allow long-term insurgent activity to survive. Modern counterterrorism campaigns are often described in terms of battles, airstrikes, and territorial gains, yet military planners understand a different reality. The true strength of an armed group is rarely measured only by the number of fighters it possesses. It is measured by its ability to sustain operations over time. This is why logistics and financing have become some of the most important battlegrounds in the Sahel. A militant organization can recruit fighters, but without fuel, transportation, communications equipment, weapons, safe houses, and reliable supply routes, its ability to conduct large-scale operations gradually weakens. Every movement across a vast region such as the Sahel requires resources. Every attack requires planning, transportation, intelligence, and supplies. For this reason, recent military actions in Mali appear designed to target more than individual combatants. The focus increasingly includes the systems that allow those combatants to survive and operate. Storage facilities, transportation networks, supply routes, and sources of funding have become critical targets. Military analysts often compare insurgent logistics to the bloodstream of a living organism. As long as resources continue to flow, the organization can adapt and recover from losses. However, when those flows are disrupted, operational effectiveness begins to decline. Fighters may struggle to move between regions. Communication becomes more difficult. Recruitment efforts slow down. Local influence weakens. This strategy is particularly relevant in the Sahel, where distance plays a major role in military operations. Armed groups frequently rely on mobility and dispersed networks rather than large conventional bases. Limiting their freedom of movement can therefore create significant pressure, even without major ground battles. From this perspective, the operations taking place across Mali represent more than a series of tactical victories. They reflect an effort to challenge the foundations that sustain long-term insurgent activity. The objective is not only to win individual engagements, but also to reduce the ability of hostile networks to regenerate, reorganize, and project influence across the regions. While military operations often dominate headlines, the image that captured attention across the Sahel was not a fighter jet, a drone, or a battlefield report. It was the sight of Captain Ibrahim Traoré traveling alongside soldiers on the Dédougou-Solenzo route. For many observers, this was far more than a routine visit. The road itself carries significant symbolic weight. For years, areas surrounding this corridor have faced security threats, including armed attacks and roadside explosive devices. Traveling through such an environment is not simply a matter of protocol. It sends a message that leadership is willing to be physically present in regions where security challenges remain real. This is one reason the event resonated so strongly among supporters across Burkina Faso and neighboring countries. In times of conflict, symbolism matters. Soldiers on the front line often measure leadership not only by speeches, but also by visible actions. A leader who appears in difficult environments can strengthen morale and reinforce the belief that sacrifices made by security forces are recognized at the highest levels. The significance of the visit becomes even greater when viewed alongside the military operations taking place in Mali. As pressure increased on armed groups across Gao, Kidal, Kayes, and Buguni. Traore's presence on a forward route created the impression of a broader regional determination to confront insecurity. Supporters interpreted the journey as evidence of shared risk. They saw a leader willing to stand closer to the realities faced by ordinary soldiers rather than remaining distant from events on the ground. At the same time, the visit carried a message for local communities living in conflict-affected areas. Beyond military objectives, stability ultimately depends on public confidence. When residents witness state institutions maintaining a presence in challenging regions, it can help reinforce the perception that those areas have not been abandoned. For this reason, the journey to Solenzo became more than a security visit. It evolved into a symbol of resilience, responsibility, and the determination to maintain a visible commitment to the struggle for stability across the Sahel. To fully understand the significance of